What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the Varsity Overland channel, and today we're taking a look at 3 common mistakes that overlanders make when they are modifying their overland rig that can negatively impact their gas mileage. And before we dive into this, I want to let you know, if you like the content in this video, consider subscribing to the channel because I put out a new video every week. I have other informational videos on my channel as well as adventure videos, so please consider subscribing. So when it comes to outfitting your vehicle for overland travel, there are a lot of options out there. You know, the trend has kind of become so popular now that you can find, dozens of different products from 100 different companies, and it's very easy for us to just get into the mindset of buying everything we can, slapping everything on our vehicle, and then heading out on an adventure, whether it's, a weekend trip or, a cross-country, several-week-long expedition. And then we return from those events and realize that most of the money spent for all this was actually on fueling up the vehicle. So today we're talking about gas mileage. These are a few things that I've learned over the years. I've been doing this for about 3 years now with my 2021 Chevy Colorado ZR2 that I have named Goose. And so I just wanted to share some of my experiences with you. I'm going to break this down into 3 parts, and then maybe I'll have a bonus section at the very end. So stay tuned. So the first component that I want to mention are tires. Now, the tires might seem obvious, but there's actually 3 things that you need to consider when you're looking at tires for your vehicle in regard to the MPGs. We have the age of the tire, we have the type of tire, like the tread, and then we have the weight of the tire. Now, the age of the tire is often overlooked, but basically, the older your tires get, the worse they're going to perform. They do all the testing on the tires to prove how well they are on the trail, how well they are on the road, their fuel economy, but all that testing is when the tire's brand new. As the tire wears down over time, it could definitely impact your fuel economy. The second component is going to be the type of tire. Now, we have 3 options to choose from here. We've got street tires on one end of the spectrum, and then on the very opposite end, we've got mud terrain tires. Now, obviously, street tires are for the street, so they would be the best as far as fuel economy. On the other end, we've got mud terrain tires. Those tend to be kind of the most bulky, rugged, off-roading tires, and they're going to be probably the worst for fuel economy. And then in the middle, we have all-terrain tires, and all-terrain tires tend to be the most obvious choice for overlanders because we do spend a fair amount of time on the trail, but we also spend a fair amount of time on the road, and an all-terrain is advertised as being kind of like a best of both worlds situation. However, even when you're choosing an all-terrain tire, if your focus is gas mileage and your fuel economy, it can go both ways as well. Some companies, for example, will start at one end of the spectrum with a street tire and make it slightly more rugged and then call it an all-terrain. And then on the opposite side, a company might take a mud terrain tire and make it a little less rugged and also call it an all-terrain tire. But clearly, depending on what side of that spectrum they pull from, it's still going to affect how well it performs on the road with its fuel economy. So a good example that I can think of from the street tire side would be the Kenda Clever AT2. It performs a lot like a street tire. It even has a tread pattern that's kind of similar to a street tire. It evacuates water almost the same way a street tire does, but it's just a little bit more rugged, and it has an interesting sidewall that gives it some of that more beefy visual appeal. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, we could actually look at something like the Goodyear Wrangler Duratrack, or the new version of this tire, which would be the Goodyear Wrangler Territory, which is coming out on the new Chevy Colorados. But this would be an example of like that more mud terrain feel, or that more mud terrain look of a tire that just got dialed down a little bit. If your idea is fuel economy, which would be the reason why you're watching this video, you might want to pull from the end of the spectrum where the tire is most suited for performance on the road, and then it can do some light trails and some light off-roading, but it's going to shine more obviously on the road. Then the final piece when it comes to tires would be its weight. When you're looking at tires, They can range in load rating, and because of their load rating, it usually affects the weight of the tire as well. Those all-terrain tires that might be more fuel efficient are probably going to end up being lighter. So if you're worried about sacrificing the rugged look of your tire because it's going to lean more towards that road performance and that gas mileage performance, you could look at the weight of the tire and actually get something that's a little bit larger if you're hoping to run something like, 33s or maybe even bigger than 33s. You could get a big tire that is actually a more fuel efficient tire. You can play a little math game like that if you're hoping to maximize fuel economy while also gain a little bit of height, or size with your tire, and technically it'd still be considered an all-terrain tire.
Now, the second component we're going to look at after the type of tire that you choose for your vehicle would be the off-road armor or similar components that you can add to your vehicle. As you can see, I have a front bumper from Fab Fours that has a 12,000 pound synthetic winch on the inside. I do not have a rear bumper on this vehicle, so I only have the front bumper right now. I got the front bumper after I dented up the original factory plastic bumper a little bit, driving through a frozen puddle through a state forest last winter. And when I did, I ended up installing the winch. I actually included this in a previous video regarding the fact that, I've had this vehicle for 3 years. I've had the winch and the bumper for a little over a year. It's been across the country twice, and I've actually never used my winch. If you want to see more about that video, I'm going to put the link right up here. Hopefully it's on the side right now. But when it comes to off-road armor, normally Overlanders, and I'm talking about myself included, we get our vehicle and we think, okay, what can I chop off? What can I add on? How can I make this thing look more rugged? How can I make it more indestructible on the trail? Yada, yada, yada. And when we do that, it's definitely gonna increase the weight of the whole vehicle, okay? When you're looking at off-road armor, which includes a bumper in the front, a bumper in the back, probably some, skid plates and things like that underneath. I would even consider something like, a metal roof rack on top. When you're going to add all these components to your vehicle, you got to be careful about how heavy you're going to make it, because you'll definitely see a decrease in your miles per gallon. So I'm not saying don't do that, because clearly I've done it, but I can make some suggestions about when or how you do it. So number one, if you're going to get a front bumper, what size front bumper do you really need? So clearly you can see that I've got what would be considered one of those covert, and I'm using air quotes here, covert front bumpers, because it only takes up really the first, center section of my bumper. So I didn't get something that was ginormous, that covered, from the passenger side all the way over to the driver's side of the vehicle. It's not insanely heavy. It just covers the front section here in front of the grill, just enough basically so that I can install a winch, and, it leaves a little bit more protection for the center of the vehicle. Now, that would be lighter than if I were to go with a full front bumper. Now, let's say you really enjoy that full front bumper look. Honestly, I also do, but the ZR2 at the time didn't really have a whole lot of options, so here we are. But let's say you really enjoy that full front bumper look, one of those front bumpers that comes all the way here to the wheel well, and maybe it's even got those big bull bar loops that come up over your headlights, kind of like that safari truck look. If you really enjoy that, then you could do that, but then you need to consider maybe what it's made of, the material of the bumper. Companies like, let's say, CBI Off-Road or Backwoods Adventure Mods, they make full front bumpers that can cover the whole front face of the vehicle, but they can make them out of steel, or they can make them out of aluminum. So if you really enjoy the look, you could go with an aluminum full front bumper, which would be definitely lighter than the steel bumper, but just know that you're also going to sacrifice some safety there, because I don't care what people say, if you hit a tree, a rock, an animal like a deer with that aluminum bumper, it's not going to protect you. It's not going to perform the same. I don't want to say it's not going to protect you, but it's not going to protect you the same as the steel one would have. Now, in regard to the winch that you install inside your bumper, also consider how big do you really need the winch to be. Mine is a 12,000 pound ZXR Badlands that I got from Harbor Freight. I've seen a lot of other people use the same winch on their Chevy Colorados. But the reason why I got a 12,000 pound was basically because they didn't have the other ones available at the time. 12,000 pounds is overkill for this truck. I could probably just get away with a 10,000 pound. And I know some companies actually recommend specific winches for their bumpers when you buy them. Like Ironman 4x4, they have bumpers that you can get for their Toyota 4Runners, and they actually suggest installing the 9,000 pound winch in some of those bumpers, which would lead you to assume that a 9,000 pound winch would be fine for a 4Runner, assuming that you don't really push the limits of your load capacity on that vehicle. But what I'm saying here is, when you get a winch that is capable of pulling lighter, you know, let's say if I got the 10K versus the 12K, that winch itself, you know, the actual weight of the winch carrying it, the winch is going to be a little bit lighter too. Let's say you already have your winch, okay? What could you do to make the winch lighter? If it's a steel cable, you can swap out the steel cable for synthetic, and the synthetic rope will definitely be lighter than the steel cable. I ended up doing that when I bought this winch. It was a steel cable, and as you can see, if I get in here, I swapped it out for a synthetic just to make it a little bit lighter. And I did that right before we took our 3-week trip this past summer from Connecticut to Colorado. And the final component that I'll mention regarding, you know, adding a bumper, how heavy can it be, the off-road armor here would be, if you don't necessarily need the bumper, but you would like to run a winch, there are different options where you could install a covert winch behind the grill of your vehicle. A lot of companies make winch attachments for like OEM locations just behind the factory grill or the factory bumper. I know Jeep specifically even makes components where you can attach your winch to the basic plastic front bumper on something like a Wrangler Sport or a Gladiator Sport. So you don't necessarily even have to take away the factory bumper and add, you know, a heavy steel bumper. If you wanted a winch, there are other ways to install a winch, and that would absolutely save weight and therefore fuel economy on your vehicle. All right, so now we're moving on to the third and final component as far as, you know, how we handle our miles per gallon with our overland vehicles. And yes, I am standing on top of a picnic table right now. But the third and final component would be everything on top of your vehicle. We love putting racks on racks on racks on racks on racks on top of our overland vehicles so that we can carry as much equipment as possible, because who knows when you're gonna need all that extra stuff, right? We tend to bring more than we actually need for those what if scenarios. But as you can see, I've got a bed rack, which is a Yakima Overhaul HD. And then I also have a cab rack, which is the Prinsu rack. And the biggest thing that I can say about these racks is be careful what you put on them as far as miles per gallon. If I put a bunch of bulky, big, tall boxes on top of either of these racks, you can guarantee it's going to create wind drag, and it's going to slow down the vehicle, cause the vehicle to work harder to get up to speed, and therefore you're burning more fuel. So when you're choosing your cargo, and even when you're choosing a rooftop tent, if you are someone who enjoys rooftop tents, look at the aerodynamics, look at the size, look at all those components so that you can know whether or not it's really going to negatively affect your miles per gallon. I have run various types of cargo cases on top of the Prinsu rack, and I have also used a iCamper Skycamp 2.0 on top of the bed rack. And although the iCamper is definitely aerodynamic-ish, it's shaped with a curvature to it, but that doesn't mean that it's, you know, it's perfect. It doesn't mean that it doesn't slow down my vehicle. It is still this big, you know, brick up there. And if you have a different type of rooftop tent, typically one of those soft shells with the canvas on top, it definitely just looks like a big old square on top of the vehicle with a flat face. That's going to collect some wind as you drive, and it's going to cause some problems with your miles per gallon. So I'm at a point now where I'm more focused on how can I get all of my gear either inside the cab or inside the bed, and then just kind of put like the most basic, smallest components on the outside of the vehicle. From here forward, I would love to just put something like my recovery boards and, you know, a thin Rotopax gas can on top of the Prinsu rack if I had to. For a lot of trips, especially my weekend trips, I don't even put anything on top of the Prinsu rack up top, just because I don't want extra stuff up there creating drag and ruining my gas mileage, essentially. Now, I did say I was going to try to add one little bonus component at the end of the video, so here it is. Although it should be no shocker to anybody, regular maintenance on your vehicle, including all the fluids in the engine and all the fluids everywhere else on the undercarriage of the vehicle. If you keep up with regular maintenance, it is definitely going to help with your fuel economy. The better shape your vehicle is in, the better shape your engine is in, the better it'll perform and the less it'll have to work in order to move you and your cargo. All right, folks, well, that's going to be it for this video. And now that we're done, I do have a question for you. Regarding the snorkel, I was considering adding some information on this video about the snorkel and, you know, pulling in cleaner air, the air quality for the engine and all that kind of stuff, and whether or not it helped or hurt fuel economy. But frankly, I just don't know much about it. So if you have any information about snorkels and whether or not they do impact fuel economy, definitely leave a comment down below. Also, if you know of any other products that can actually improve the fuel economy of the vehicle, regardless of all the information I just provided. I know some people talk about throttle controllers every once in a while with fuel economy. So if you know of a product, maybe it's a throttle controller, maybe it's something else. If you know of anything that can help improve fuel economy, you can leave that down in the comments below as well. I appreciate the view. Please consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace, people.